Mr. Wilson, do you say to the allegation that the protest was unlawful?
It was not unlawful, not according to the law of Canada.
And the other fact that, what do you say to the fact that the protesters were frustrated to the fact that their bank accounts were frozen?
Sorry, ask your question again, my friend.
So, you said that the frustration between the clients of yours and the protesters, the fact that they cannot actually purchase gasoline because their
Yep.
bank accounts were frozen.
Well, freezing the bank accounts had a huge impact, and people missed mortgage payments and couldn't make car payments and couldn't buy food and prescriptions. So it was an excellent example of the government using its most extreme tools to try and punish those Canadians who stood up and were challenging government overreach and asking for respect to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Fair enough.
Okay, so just you said that your wife's assessment of the government overreaching the COVID-19 pandemic was what pushed you to the work of the Convoy. Would you say, just out of curiosity, that you were an apolitical person before that, or less concerned with this ability?
Was I?
Yeah.
Well, I can assure you of this, my wife was. She was extremely apolitical and busy with her own activities and caring for our elderly parents and doing work with her church. But her medical training was such that she observed the advice that was starting to come from the public health officials and doing her own research, and she said this doesn't add up anymore. And she became very concerned about the direction of the country, the level of overreach, the mandates, the harm that they were causing to children in schooling, playgrounds, normal activities, that she said, you got to get involved.
Yeah. Well, we've heard the Government of Canada Council talk about hate speech. What are your views on hate speech and hate speech laws by federal government?
Well, my view is that in any other modern democracy, for a prime minister to call 6 million Canadians racist, misogynists, and say, how do we deal with these people, and should we tolerate these people, would result in such a level of reaction that that prime minister would be forced to resign and apologize. And the fact that this prime minister deliberately divided and created hate, engaged in the process of othering people, and so far has suffered no political consequences, absolutely remarkable.
At which point do you think that the Prime Minister has spoken with the protesters? You guys would have been here for less long, or a situation would have been resolved quicker than it was?
You know, it's amazing that none of the protesters and the leadership and otherwise wanted to meet with the Prime Minister. It's not an individual they hold in high regard. It's an individual that they believe has done unbelievable harm to our country, to its social fabric, and to our economy, and so on, and is engaged in reprehensible conduct in terms of his hate speech. There was a strong desire and numerous requests to sit down with some of the federal ministers and have a substantive discussion about the policy foundations of the mandates. Because remember, the other G7 countries were not doing this. A lot of Canadians don't realize that we were a significant anomaly. They were not restricting their citizens who were unvaccinated from traveling within their country, from getting on airplanes and trains. The Americans didn't even do it, and they're a bit of an anomaly too in terms of the extreme measures they took. So, you know, is the science different? No. Are aircraft different from from Europe to here? No. Is the virus different? No. So it was purely a political exercise. There was a hope that if we could establish a dialogue and put the scientific evidence forward, that the government may take a reasoned approach and follow the lead of all the other G7 countries that weren't imposing these extremely restrictive mandates, and would.
At which point, Mr. Wilson, this protest became illegal, you think?
What nature were the police weeks about?
Sorry?
The police weeks that you were talking about, what nature were they?
Constant and extensive. Operational, who was going to do what, when, and where.
At which
Do you know
point?
exactly how the police were going to act on a day-to-day basis,
That's correct.
hour by hour?
When you take, 20% of your force and say because you're not going to take an experimental injection, you're going to lose your job, and you force them out, or you say the only way you're going to keep your job and make your mortgage payment and provide for your family is if you take it, and you do take it. There was a lot of police officers then and now that believe that what the government did was absolutely wrong.
At which point this protest became illegal, you think? At which point?
They communicated extensively with individuals involved in the convoy protest regularly.
Police
Mr. Wilson,
which
Not with me
services?
personally.
Which
At which-
services that were leaking?
All of them.
RCMP as well?
Yes.
Active RCMP officers leaked to the convoy?
Yes.
OPP, Ottawa Police,
Yes.
SCRS, C6?
Yes. Yes.
All of
CSIS. Yeah. Not military, because the only information we got from the military was not going to get involved.
The
Active
commissioner
agent from
asked
the
you,
CSIS
at the end of your testimony and cross-examination today about whether police had offered any zone to protest in. And he's asked this of a couple of other witnesses as well. Where do you think that question's coming from?
Well, I mean, it's an important question from the commissioner, because it illustrates one of the ways in which this could be de-escalated and managed. And I believe it's becoming more and more clear from the evidence that that's not what the Prime Minister was interested in. He was interested in escalation. He was interested in confrontation. And by the Commissioner asking and exploring this topic so thoroughly about alternative options to de-escalate things indicates to me that he wants to ensure, when he reaches his conclusion, is it the case that all these other alternatives were in fact not pursued?
If police had offered an option where you could continue to protest as individuals, but no trucks, no vehicles allowed, would that have been something you would have recommended protesters accept?
I think that would have been a natural progression. You could see how we were already on a trajectory of significantly lessening the footprint and converting it into a more traditional protest. So I think the progression that we were on was to consolidate Wellington. 75% of the vehicles leave to the remote locations, with half of those going home. People being shuttle bussed in, the mayor talked about that. And then I could have seen them saying, all right, maybe we put up barricades like they have now on Wellington Street at this very moment that the government put up, and turn it into a pedestrian protest. I could have seen that a progression. That's what we were working towards. This idea that you can snap your fingers and resolve this is not, it was a complex problem, as I testified, required a complex solution with phases to it. We were on our way to implementing those, and we got stopped.
At which point did it become illegal, you think? At which point did it become illegal, you think?
At no point did it become illegal. At no point was the Riot Act read as required under the Criminal Code. At no point was any of the legal criteria that are necessary to declare a protest to be unlawful were met. There's no evidence of it. And in fact, counsel for the barrister, Mr. Brendan Miller, has asked a number of police officials, and they have acknowledged they took none of the steps, and the criteria for it to be an illegal protest were never met. So this is a term of art that's creeped into the discussion, and I've always questioned at what point in time does the person believe that it was illegal, and on what legal basis. And if you ask them that question, they just go, oh, well, I just thought that many people being around is illegal. No, that's not how the law works. It requires more precision.
Mr. Wilson, the military intelligence reports that you received internally talked a lot about Antifa. Did it talk about the concerns over sovereign citizens as well as QAnon? Did any of those internal intelligence reports by Tom Quiggin address those issues?
They were daily. Are you with her? Okay. There were daily reports. However, They were not something that was mission critical for me, so I rarely read them.
You called them weirdos, though. Like some of them, you were saying there was seances happening in hotels. Can you talk a little bit about that?
There was diverse Canadians with some various strange following practices that showed up. I think that's clear. There was that one cult that showed up that was difficult to manage for the police and for the protesters.
You said before that you didn't control all the different convoy elements, that no one controlled all the different convoy
That's right.
elements. I'm wondering, given that, how confident you are that if the government had offered a different solution, a different site to protest or something like that you would have been able to get people to move?
My simple answer to that is, look what happened on the Monday. Despite all the problems that the police admitted to, blocking the movement of the trucks, over 100 vehicles were moved, most of which left downtown, and only 23 went up to Wellington. That's proof of the plan having the ability to be successful. It's proof that the moral suasion that some of the symbolic leaders of the protest had. It illustrates that there were many involved who needed to find a way to gracefully and respectfully leave and bring this to an end and return home. We were alive to all those dynamics, and the plan that we started to implement was working until it was stopped by the police. The police notes in evidence, the testimony under oath from the police have confirmed that they were the ones that blocked the deal from being completed. Had they supported it, and we would have had the entire downtown, but for Wellington, opened up and cleared out by the Wednesday, whereas bringing in the Emergencies Act and use of force against peaceful Canadians didn't get completed until the Saturday and the Sunday.
So do you think that the convoy deserved a policing solution or a political solution?
I think it clearly required a political solution. And the fact that when progress was made, it was through political dialogue. That's how we used to do things in Canada. We would have discussions, and we would be respectful and listen to different views. It hasn't been our history to unleash riot police on a scale never occurred before on nonviolent, unarmed, peaceful Canadians holding on to a copy of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And how was your relationship with the LRT during the convoy, the PLC, sorry, the police liaison team throughout the convoy?
It ebbed and flowed. The frustration was we didn't know what we now know with all the testimony and the infighting that was occurring and the power struggles with the police. But what we sensed at the time, because I was in all those negotiations, is they didn't have power. You know, they couldn't follow through. So that's why Mr. Marazzo early on requested an inspector level. I really believe that if we would have had some police from the OPP and the Ottawa City Police that were further up the chain of command, this would have been resolved peacefully and de-escalated many days sooner.
Just about the organizers, you were talking about.
Could you turn to the camera, please?
About the the group de Farfada. Okay, so they're everywhere in the police reports, and apparently they were aggressive and they would move and they were. Since you were on the ground, so what do you know about them? Is it true that they were dangerous, as the police seem to be saying in their reports? What do you know about that?
Well, the first time I heard that expression was here in the inquiry. None of the key people that were involved with the Freedom Convoy and working to negotiate and seek clearing of intersections and so on had ever heard of the term before either. The protesters who were at the intersection of Rideau and Sussex were comprised of some people from Quebec who had some very strong views, some of whom had lost custody of children and lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods. But it was also comprised, interestingly, of recent immigrants from Eastern Europe, as well as immigrants from Cuba. And they had seen the tyranny, they had seen how authoritarian governments evolve, and they were deeply concerned about what they were seeing here in Canada with the COVID mandates and the restrictions on rights and freedoms. So they were very, very motivated.
So the threats posed apparently by the Farfada are what, overblown? What do you?
Absolutely overblown. You could see in the testimony yesterday, they thought Mr. Charland was the head of the group at Rouleau in Sussex. We all looked him up because we didn't know his name. We looked up his pictures. We didn't recognize him. And he testified that the only time he was at Rouleau in Sussex was when he walked through, as he was walking through the downtown like anybody else. So I don't know where the police got their intelligence on him, but you can see how badly off it was.
Given that the authorities were so concerned about these elements like Farfada, like the sovereign citizens, like QAnon, do you think that your organization, the organizers that you represented, could have distanced themselves from these groups earlier on?
Well, the group, the first time the group Farfada was mentioned, for anybody with the Freedom Convoy, was here at the inquiry. So there was no known group to distance from.
Sovereign citizens, some of the Nazi flags that were displayed that first weekend, some of the extreme right-wing groups that were present. Do you think that the Freedom Convoy organizers could have distanced themselves early on? You distanced yourselves from Pat King. Could you have made a statement earlier on, given the fact that the federal government, police authorities seem most concerned about these elements? Is that a strategy that you would want to revisit in retrospect?
The protesters were very clear that they wanted government overreach to stop, that they wanted the Charter of Rights and Freedoms respected for all Canadians of all ethnic backgrounds, that they wanted the rule of law adhered to. And the fact that so many of the protesters were from Canadians and immigrants of all ethnic and religious backgrounds, to any honest observer would conclude that this was not some right-wing extremist movement at all.
We know that at Coventry Road there were sovereign citizens deputizing themselves. Do you denounce that? Do you think that's a legitimate response to protest? What do you make of those elements?
I remember getting a phone call, an urgent phone call from one of the PLTs who advised that some sovereign citizens had arrived at Coventry and they were seeking to deputize some of the truckers. I called that in, and a number of representatives with a law enforcement background who were with the truckers immediately went over there and explained to the truckers that it was nonsense and told the sovereign citizen types to leave.
Now we're 3 weeks into the inquiry. Would you have done anything differently in the convoy, knowing everything that we know right now?
Just repeat your question.
Would you have acted any differently during the convoy? We're 3 weeks into the inquiry. Would you have done anything differently now we're 3 weeks within the inquiry?
With respect to the inquiry?
To the convoy, like the organization of the convoy, everything related to the convoy. Would you have done anything differently?
Not that I can think of. I mean, everybody was trying to make the best decisions we could at the time. It was a very, very dynamic environment with lots of moving parts, lots of uncertainty. I was impressed continually by the repeated message of peacefulness, of not engaging with the police, not engaging with Antifa when they would come and vandalize the trucks, but instead turn those people over to the police for arrest. That would be my answer.
Just last thing for me, could you talk to us a little bit about Tamara Leach's bail condition, Chris Barber's bail condition? I think Chris Barber also has bail conditions. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, the frustrating thing for Tamara Leach is that she's effectively under a gag order, and that's why she's not able to speak to the media. She would love to speak to the media, but she doesn't want to go back to jail. And so unless the media wants to interview her about how she learned to play the guitar and what it's like to be a grandmother, she can't do media interviews. She'd love to, but she can't. That's why she's excited about this opportunity to testify, because this is going to be her first chance to be able to tell her story and send her message and her views, share them with others without risking going to jail.
And Chris?
Chris, his bail conditions aren't as restrictive. A lot of them relate to contact with others and other matters, but because the bail conditions are drafted in such a vague way, and the Crown prosecutor on this case has demonstrated such repeated passion, using his own word, and given enlarged interpretation to the vague language, as part of the legal team, we've had to be ultra cautious in ensuring that we don't misstep and they inadvertently don't breach their bail conditions.
The Ottawa Police Service, sir, you seem to be getting information from the Ottawa Police Service at Convoy headquarters. How would you characterize that leak? Was it a high-level leak? Was it several officers? Can you tell us about it, please? I answered that question in my testimony.
I think, Mr. Wilson, that the Convoy organizers had a very good relationship with police, OPP, through Morazzo, through Daniel Bulford. That information, you were able to get some real-time information through your contacts and the relationship with them. Is that correct?
It wasn't through those two individuals. It wasn't through Tom Morazzo, and it wasn't through Danny Bulford. Danny Bulford was not one of the conduits for information. It was more dispersed than that, because there were so many police officers in Canada that are also deeply troubled about the government's policies and actions.
You mentioned Antifa a few times during your testimony. You mentioned it just now. What kind of evidence do we have that this particular group was involved, and how are they being identified?
There was social media posts there by Antifa, yeah, as well as those who were stopped and caught vandalizing the vehicles.
So they were self-identifying as Antifa, or was that identity being thrust upon them?
Well, they were had the hallmarks of Antifa, and I get the hallmarks of Antifa are to dress in all black, skinny jeans, a hoodie, have a backpack that's black,
right,
and yeah.
So from that, we deduced that these people are somehow involved in Antifa?
No, it wasn't that alone. It was the braggadocious comments that they were making on social media and their posts, okay, and the spray painting of graffiti and the messages that they were putting on vehicles.
Mr. Wilson, one last thing for me is that the Emergency Act is that, well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Public Safety Minister Mark Mendicino keep saying that the Emergency Act was justified and necessary to clear the protest and to end the Freedom Convoy protest. What do you have to say about that claim?
The reality is not a single trucker left because their bank account was frozen. We've already had extensive evidence that they were able to secure tow trucks without the Emergencies Act. And in any event, there's clear legal criteria that are required to be met in order for the government to use these unprecedented powers to override Canadians' rights and interfere in provincial jurisdiction. And all of the evidence so far is absolutely uncontested and clear that those conditions weren't present. And that is the evidence, in fact, of the Superintendent for Intelligence with the OPP, so or inspector level. They haven't made their case, and I don't think it's going to get any better with the witnesses to come.
Mr. Wilson, just because I'm not sure if we were rolling at the beginning, when you talked about the information that was coming to you from police services, you did an enumeration when you said which services it was coming from, and even CSIS. I think I would maybe ask you to repeat that answer if you can, but where the information, the operational information or intelligence you received came from.
The reality that we were facing at the time is that police officers and security officials with all of the different agencies in Canada, a large number of them had lost their jobs because of the requirement to be vaccinated under the federal mandates, and others had gotten vaccinated but felt they were forced into it in order to keep providing for their family. As a result, when information was known to them about some of the activities, it was regularly filtered down through various protesters and those within the leadership group of the Freedom Convoy. So at all times there was a high degree of situation awareness of what the operational plans were for the police. One thing that didn't really filter through very well was the level of dysfunction and infighting that has come out in the evidence. But other than that, there was a steady stream of information and leaks coming from all of the different police forces and security agencies.
From on-duty officers?
Well, it was people obviously, no, I suspect, I don't know the intricacies, but obviously someone would have been in a room or got a memo or an email saying, this is what we're doing Friday night, and then they would call someone and say, hey, phone so-and-so, and let them know this is what's going. It was always multi-layered, so you never know exactly who the source was. But the police know of this. They've testified in their notes and their documents that they understood that they were that there was wide-scale leaking within the service, that there was low morale in many areas because of the impact that the mandates and the restrictions were having even on their own forces.
And we're talking about OPS, OPP, RCMP, CSIS, all of them?
All of them.
Which specific, sorry, I just jumped in, maybe you already answered it.
Why are you always late? Please. This is called a scrum, and you're supposed to come here.
I'm scrumming in late.
I apologize, please, the full camera. We just need to see your best side.
I don't have a best side.
So you can look at it.
Sorry, guys. Specific, you're talking about the leaks. What specific police operations or things did you guys learn from them that changed tactics for the leadership, or tipped you off on any specific raid that was coming or anything like that? Do you have any specifics on what you guys learned from the cops?
Well, I mean, there would be information when certain raids were planned, so it allowed the leadership to anticipate how they would respond. So, for example, there was indication that they were going to come and do a raid one evening, so the direction was given for all of any protest vehicle, like an RV or whatever, that had a family with children in it. They would go. There was a large number of Ottawa residents that said, if something happens, bring your family to my home in Ottawa. So we would then give out the direction that it was time to move the children and the families to those billet homes in Ottawa. So that would be an example of where, if information was received, it would be acted on.
But what would be the date of that? When
it happened more than once. Yeah, it was after.
After Coventry?
Yeah, no, I think we even activated. No, it was after Coventry. It was later that week.
Would you describe the information you're receiving from police as more like hearsay information of, hey, I heard from a cop who heard from a friend, or I heard from a friend who heard from a cop, or was it, hi, I'm Sergeant so-and-so with the OPP, this is what we're planning? Just characterize the information you were receiving a little bit.
It was never that direct. I mean, people would be careful to not reveal themselves, but they were very concerned about what they saw happening, and were very supportive of the effort to bring attention to the harms of the government lockdowns and mandates.
Did you get your eyes like what you would call a primary document from any police source, like what you would call a memo or something that actually came from one of the police agencies that we just talked about?
Yes.
You did? Can you say what it was?
We saw the document when the OPP were upset at and I think this has been put in evidence since, but we saw it in real time, when the OPP were upset at the tactic of the Ottawa police announcing they were going to arrest any resident who brought food, fuel, or supplies to the truckers, and a direction was given that the OPP were not to assist in those arrests, that the OPP disagreed with that strongly and thought that was a bad idea. So we got that in real time. So we knew that the Ottawa Police Service would be restricted in their ability to carry that out because they didn't have the support of the OPP.
We know that
an email or a memo or
it was an email. It was an email. Yeah.
Can you say from whom?
No, I don't know who it was from. It was.
But it was from somebody within the OPP.
Yeah, it was a senior command officer to all of the people assigned to the protest.
Sorry, just to clarify, did you see the email?
Yeah. Yeah, a paper copy of it. I saw a photograph of it. So you would get a photograph of something.
Okay.
So you couldn't trace it back, right, through metadata.
But you didn't see the name of the top email?
Yeah, I just can't remember. It was unimportant to me.
Sorry, was it anybody who's testified here?
I really can't remember.
We know that Mr. Barber was concerned that separating himself from Pat King would lead to maybe a decrease in support from Mr. King's various supporters. He had quite many. Was there also a concern within the leadership that distancing yourself from the sovereign citizens from QAnon, from those diverse groups, that you would lessen your strength in terms of numbers?
No, none whatsoever.
So the strategy, there was never talk about distancing yourself from those groups?
No, it's not something that, when you're involved in something like this, that you're focused on. You're trying to manage what you can. You realize that other people are going to show up. It's a free country. It's just the way it goes. And there was a concern about how the protest was being characterized, and efforts were made to always restate why the protesters were here and their absolute view that it must be done peacefully, and without any violence. And their goal was not to cause an overthrow of the government. They weren't even calling on, if you go back and carefully examine the messaging from the True Freedom Convoy, they weren't even asking for the Prime Minister to resign. They weren't asking for an election. They were asking for an end to the mandates.
Why not condemn those elements, those racist elements, right away, obviously, because it's something that you disagreed with? Why not do that? Why not?
I think they did. I think they did. You guys just didn't report on it.
You and Sandra said that there was the only news release you put out was in regards to Pat King.
No, there were several. The only news release we put out with respect to an individual was Pat King.
But you didn't denounce certain groups. You didn't say, do not deputize yourself. We disagree with this. QAnon does not represent us. You do not say those specific things.
I didn't, but people associated with the Freedom Convoy did.
But they weren't giving news conferences at the time. They were not talking to media. So where
they were talking to different forms of media. People get their information from, as we all know, from a variety of sources now, and there was a strong recognition of that. And it was an imperfect process with very fast-moving parts, with people who had never been involved in something that required a communication strategy before. There was very limited ability to limit the communications.
So that perception that there were these extreme elements that perhaps played a greater role, that was something perhaps of your own doing because you weren't speaking to mass media?
No.
No, you disagree with that?
I disagree with that.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you.
All right, see you guys.